The late autumn air of 19th-century Alaska bit with a promise of winter's coming fury. Elias, a man carved from the same rough timber as the wilderness he roamed, trudged toward the trading post. His beard was a tangle of frost, and his movements were slow, burdened by the weight of a long winter and the heavy promise of freedom he carried in his thoughts. For years, he'd lived by the rhythm of the land, trapping and trading pelts, but the endless cycle of solitude and hardship had worn him thin. This was his last run. The money he was owed for this season's haul was enough to buy a ticket south, to a place where the sun was more than a distant pale memory and a man could live without the constant gnawing fear of being consumed by the cold. As he pushed open the heavy wooden door, a bell jangled with a mournful clang. The scent of pine and old leather filled the small space, but something was different. The familiar, gruff voice of old man Sterling was gone, replaced by a quiet, unsettling stillness. Behind the counter stood a woman. She was young, with auburn hair pulled back tightly, and a face that, despite its youth, was marked by a deep, weary sorrow. Her name was Clara. "Can I help you?" she asked, her voice soft but steady. Elias set his pack of pelts on the counter. "I'm here to get paid. Sterling owes me for the winter's take." Clara's gaze didn't waver, but her eyes, the color of a stormy sea, held a silent apology. "I'm afraid Mr. Sterling passed a month ago. He was my husband," she said, her voice catching just slightly. "I inherited the post." Elias felt a cold dread wash over him, colder than the wind outside. "And the money? My pay?" Clara sighed, her shoulders slumping. "There is no money. Not yet. The supply run from Juneau is delayed. The last one was late, and this one, no word." She gestured vaguely to the empty shelves behind her. "All I have is inventory, and even that is dwindling. I'm sorry, Elias. I know he wrote it all down in the ledger, but there's nothing to give." A hot, angry wave surged through Elias. He had spent months enduring the hell of the wilderness, the frostbite, the hunger, the loneliness, for this money. "I can't leave without it," he growled, his voice rough. "I need to go south. This was it for me." Clara looked at him, her gaze unwavering. "I understand your frustration, but I have nothing to give you. I'm struggling to survive myself. I'm a woman alone in this place. I need help, and I need to keep the post running to live." She took a deep breath, and a strange, almost defiant glint appeared in her eyes. "I have a proposition, Elias. Stay and help me. Chop wood, repair the roof before the snow hits, mend the fences. I'll make sure you get your money and more once the supplies come in, but there's a condition." She lowered her voice, a flush creeping up her neck. "The people in this town, they talk. They will not respect a woman alone with a man in her house. So, for appearances, you must lie beside me, not in spirit, but in body. It's to keep up appearances, Elias. Nothing more. So, do you want your pay, or do you want to leave it behind?" Elias stared at her, utterly speechless. His mind reeled. This woman, this widow, was asking him to share her bed, not out of desire, but as a business transaction. The audacity was shocking, the pragmatism chilling. He could walk away, but his freedom was tied to the funds she held hostage. He was trapped. The thought of another winter in this desolate place was a poison in his veins. But the thought of sleeping next to her, a stranger, was a different kind of torment. He saw the desperation in her eyes, the sheer will to survive, and a flicker of something he recognized, the raw, unyielding spirit of Alaska. The wind howled outside, rattling the windows as if to remind him of the alternative. He took a long, shaky breath, the fight draining out of him. "All right," he said, his voice a low rumble. "But it's business, nothing more." The deal was sealed with a single, strained nod. Subscribe for more emotional stories like this. The first weeks were a dance of awkward, strained politeness. They lived separate lives under the same roof. By day, they worked relentlessly. Elias, with the practiced efficiency of a man who knew the land, repaired the drafty roof and fortified the storage shed. He chopped wood with a rhythmic, powerful swing, the sound echoing across the barren landscape. Clara was equally tireless. She managed the post, mended her own clothes by the light of a flickering lamp, and cooked their meager meals over a crackling fire. By night, the pretense began. They would blow out the lamps, the only light coming from the moon casting shadows through the windows. The small bed was a chasm of unspoken tension. Elias lay on one side, rigid as a statue, his back to her. Clara lay on the other, equally stiff, staring at the ceiling. They never touched. The silence was heavier than the cold air, filled with the weight of their desperation and the strangeness of their arrangement. One night the temperature plummeted. The wind howled like a tortured beast, and the flimsy walls offered little protection. Elias shivered, the cold seeping through his clothes. He heard Clara's small, quiet shiver. The instinct to pull his worn blanket over her was strong, but he resisted, remembering their deal. Business, nothing more. "Elias?" Her voice was barely a whisper in the dark. "Yeah? You're shivering," he grunted in response. "Move closer," she said, her voice tight with a mix of shame and necessity. "The cold is getting in through the walls." He hesitated for a long moment, then slowly, reluctantly turned and shifted closer. The warmth of her body was a shock, a sudden comfort in the biting cold. They lay there, a foot of space between them, the silence still thick but now holding a different weight. "My husband Mark, he was the opposite of you," Clara said softly, breaking the quiet. "He loved the thrill of the hunt, but he never understood the land. He fell through some ice. It was a cold, lonely death." Elias said nothing for a moment. Then, surprising himself, he spoke. "The land doesn't care about your dreams, Clara. It just demands respect. It takes everything you have if you're not careful." They continued to share stories under the quiet darkness of the Alaskan night. She spoke of her life before Alaska, a small, dusty farm in Idaho, and her dream of a little home with a big garden. He spoke of his own, a restless youth that led him into the wilderness, and a family he had left behind long ago, their faces fading in his memory. Through their shared labor and these hushed conversations, the walls they had built around themselves began to crumble. He found himself admiring her quiet strength, the way she managed to find moments of beauty in their hard lives, a perfectly cooked stew, the intricate embroidery on a small scarf. She saw beyond his rough exterior, finding a man of profound integrity and surprising gentleness. He started to bring her small gifts from his traplines, a colorful feather, a strangely shaped stone. She would accept them with a small, grateful smile. The nights grew colder, and without a word, they moved closer for warmth, the space between them shrinking until their bodies were a single source of heat against the encroaching cold. Their arrangement was no longer just about appearances. It had become something else entirely. "Don't forget to subscribe and like the video." A sudden sharp cry of a bell from the front of the post tore through the silence of the cabin. It was an unfamiliar sound, not the usual jangle of the trading post's bell, but the clear, resonant clang of a ship's bell. Elias sat up with a jolt, the warm weight of Clara's body beside him a powerful, lingering memory that clung to his senses. The warmth that had become his only comfort in the biting cold was suddenly gone, replaced by a cold, immediate reality. He swung his legs out of bed and went to the window. Through the frosted glass, he saw it, a team of 4 dogs, their breath a cloud of white vapor in the frigid air, pulling a heavy sled. A man in a crisp wool coat, a stranger to this wild place, stood at the front, his posture straight and confident. "Supply run," Elias said, his voice flat, devoid of any emotion he could name. The words felt like a death knell to the fragile life they had built. Clara was instantly alert, sitting up in bed and pulling a blanket tightly around her shoulders. "The money," she whispered, her eyes wide. A flicker of relief crossed her face, but it was quickly shadowed by something else, a heartbreaking mix of trepidation and fear. She knew what this meant, just as he did. Elias dressed quickly, his hands shaking slightly as he pulled on his worn buckskin jacket. This was it, the end of their strange, necessary arrangement, the end of the life they had built together over the past 2 months of shared labor and whispered secrets. The life where he was a provider and a partner, not just a passing stranger. The man from the company, a slick, businesslike fellow with a neatly trimmed beard and a distaste for the wilderness, entered the post. He spoke in a clipped, formal tone, his words full of financial jargon and polite indifference. After a brief, cold exchange, he handed Clara a heavy leather pouch of coins. The clink of metal was sharp and final. She counted them carefully, her fingers trembling, her gaze fixed on the ledger. "Elias," she said, looking up at him, her face unreadable, "here's your pay." She held out a generous amount, more than he had initially been promised, a silent recognition of his hard work, the countless hours spent mending fences, and the unspoken comfort he had provided. Elias took the pouch. It felt like a stone in his palm, heavier than any pack of pelts he had ever carried. This was his ticket. His freedom. He looked from the coins in his hand to Clara's face. Her eyes were still the color of a stormy sea, but now they held a heartbreaking vulnerability that cut him to the core. He had spent years chasing this moment. He had dreamed of the South, of a life of ease and warmth, where the sun was a constant presence and the only threat was a forgotten hat. But that dream now felt pale and empty, like a distant star he had been following that had suddenly winked out. The past 2 months with Clara, the shared silence as they chopped wood, the cold nights where her small shiver was his cue to move closer, the quiet conversations that revealed their truest selves, had given him something he had never had before. A home. Not a place, but a person. He looked at the open door, at the vast, unforgiving wilderness stretching out before him. It was the same landscape he had always known, the same towering pines and endless snowfields, but now it seemed different. It wasn't a place to escape from, but a place to build a life in, with someone else by his side. A place where their combined strength could create warmth and safety. He looked back at Clara. She was waiting, her breath held, her heart in her eyes. The choice was clear, but the pain of giving up the old dream was sharp. He could take his pay and leave, a man alone again, a ghost passing through. Or he could stay and build a new future with her, a future of shared burdens and unexpected joys. With a final decisive movement, he placed the heavy pouch of coins back on the counter. The sound was a soft thud, but it echoed like a decision made in stone. Clara's eyes widened in disbelief, a single tear escaping and sliding silently down her cheek. "Keep it," he said, his voice a low, steady rumble, filled with a certainty that had finally settled in his soul. "I'm not going anywhere. My pay, it's a fair day's wage for a fair day's work. My work isn't done yet." A faint, soft smile touched her lips, a fragile light in the harsh morning. For the first time, Elias felt truly free. He wasn't running from anything. He was staying for something. He was home.